Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us here. I'm Monique from Soul of Yoga, and I'm here today with Leslie Kaminoff, all the way from Cape Cod.
Cape Cod, Massachusetts.
Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Leslie, many of you know, he is a world-renowned yoga educator. He is the author of Yoga Anatomy. There we go, Yoga Anatomy. This is the second edition, and I believe a third edition is on its way out.
Well, yeah, I've kind of run out of excuses.
Right, it's time to get it.
Where else am I going? Yeah.
Leslie has decades of experience in the fields of anatomy and yoga and breath anatomy. And he leads workshops all over the world. In fact, Leslie just got back from a trip from Australia on March 10th, and through which he had to have a layover in Hong Kong. So Leslie—
Well, not just a layover, a 15-hour layover, because our original flight was canceled. Cathay Pacific got tired of running empty airplanes back and forth. And so they canceled a bunch of flights, tried to gather as many passengers as they could on the remaining flights. And even so, our flight home was about half empty. But yeah, we had 15 hours to kill in Hong Kong on our way back from Australia, which was not the most relaxing place to be, given the world situation now. Yeah.
Yeah. What was that like in Hong Kong? Just masks everywhere?
Yeah. Even before the coronavirus, people in Asia are much more likely to go about in public wearing masks. You see this in Japan and other places in Asia. But certainly all the employees in the airport were masked, and many of the passengers. Although the airport was pretty nearly deserted. And the lounge that we managed to gain access to, which was a nice lounge, was pretty deserted too. We were able to keep to ourselves for the most part. We took all the precautions that we were able to take. The flight home, we had a whole bulkhead row all to ourselves. And in spite of all that, I did arrive home feeling under the weather, which I ordinarily would from, let's say, 44 hours of travel door to door from where we were staying in Sydney to our apartment in New York. So given everything that's happening in the world, it was a no-brainer, to impose a self-quarantine for the recommended 2 weeks. So basically, as soon as I got in from the airport to the apartment, I did not leave the apartment for 2 weeks. And that was a week ago. And that's when we packed everything up and came to Cape Cod for another period of isolation. And I did have a fever, had some coughing, other symptoms. Whether it was COVID or not, we don't know. I didn't get tested. That was gone after a couple of days. Started feeling better, with some cold medicine and stuff. But the interesting thing from this perspective of yoga and breathing was being familiar with my own breathing through the practice and my study and teaching about breathing and yoga. It was pretty easy to tell that there was something off. If you take a deep breath and hold it, and that immediately triggers a cough reflex, there's something in there that your system is responding to, that the filtration system in my trachea and my lungs was responding to. That is one of the things that happens with COVID, is that it attacks the cilia, which line the respiratory passages, the bronchial passageways, starts breaking things down. You start accumulating mucus. And then at a certain point, your immune system responds to that. And if that gets out of control, then you have all these terrible symptoms that end up with people being intubated and so on. I was nowhere near that. And again, I don't even know if it was COVID. At the time, we had a telemedicine consult with someone on the task force through my, healthcare. And he offered testing, but I would have had to leave the apartment, go to a place where there was a lot of other sick people. And at that time, there were really not a lot of tests to go around, and there were people far more ill than I was who really needed to be tested. So the decision was easy to not go in for that. And, at a certain point, I may decide if it becomes more easily available to get tested for the antibodies, to see if I have them. And hopefully at that point, we'll know more about what it would mean to have the antibodies, meaning your system was exposed to it, your immune system responded. And now, does that mean that I have some immunity to reinfection, or we don't know. It hasn't been going on long enough. And I don't think that the science is there for us to really be able to say, what the long-term risks are for people that have been exposed and recovered. The virus itself may mutate, which could make it either easier or harder to get reinfected. There's so many unanswered questions about everything right now, about our economy and, the world that we inhabit, you and I, the world of yoga teaching and studios. There's so many studios that, had to close and may not be able to even reopen whenever things get going again. So it's a really challenging, unknown time, which is where breathing comes in again. How do we use our breathing practices to maintain our mental and emotional stability in a time like this? That's a good question. Maybe you want to ask me that question.
How do we use our breathing practices to maintain our mental and emotional stability at this really, really challenging time?
This is the witness leading the questioner. Well, you see, that I think that more than anything else is one of the main things I personally notice as a result of having some familiarity with my breath through yoga and everything. Is, first of all, a lot of us are confined in close quarters, in close proximity to other people, either that or completely alone in isolation, which, I don't know which is easier or harder. It depends on how much of an introvert or an extrovert you are, I suppose, or how empathic you are to the, emotional states of the people around you. But in any case, having the rhythms of our lives so drastically interrupted, and injecting into that situation this uncertainty and stress about not just the present but the future, it's enough to really bring up all of the kind of survival instincts that we develop over a lifetime. And for me, what breathing practice does is it has trained me to notice when those instincts are arising and to at least pause and take a breath before reacting to a situation, out of this habit. We often talk about the difference between reacting and responding. And I think the real difference between reacting and responding to a situation sometimes is just one breath. The ability to just take a breath, recenter, notice what you're feeling, and decide if you want to respond based on what you're feeling, or if there's something else to do, which is more constructive. Because there's a difference between just surviving and flourishing, even under stressful times. And something I've noticed personally as well, as easy it is to get, into the rhythms of being indoors and isolated and just going through the daily motions of eating and, whatever else we're doing. One of the reasons we came to Cape Cod is here we can just walk outside and be in the air and whatever sunlight is available. I felt my whole body responding positively as soon as I was able to move about freely in space. And we can do that as long as we respect the social distancing. So anyone that has access to being outdoors and just moving, that is so important. And I'm not even going to say that needs to be a yogic practice. That's just a human a human thing, you know. You know that feeling like, well, you live in California now, but you used to live on the East Coast. But you know that feeling like that first day where you have spring-like weather and like the sun hits your face for the first time, it feels like all winter. And you just feel like this tightly wound bud that's just opening, you know. That to me, I mean, that feeling is what a good breath practice can give you access to, even if you don't have the sunlight, you know. But the sunlight's always preferable.
Can you give us an example of a breath practice that
Mm.
might help people that don't have a breath practice
Mm.
to get that feeling, even if they're stuck inside and they can't get much sunlight, or stuck
Mhm.
inside with a whole lot of other people and not a lot of personal space?
Sure. Well, I think for someone that doesn't have a pre-existing breath practice or just wants to start simply, uh, noticing the four parts of the breath. We talk about four parts of the breath. You have your inhale, you can pause after the inhale. You have your exhale, you can pause after the exhale. So just noticing that your breath can have those four parts creates a tremendous shift all on its own, regardless of what you do with manipulating the ratios of how long each one of those four phases lasts. You know, as soon as you bring your attention to your breathing and just notice that it can have those four parts, you've done something very, very powerful. Um, and you know, I'm not the kind of person to say, well, if you do this practice, you will get that result. Um, but what I can say is that if you bring your attention to your breathing and notice that you can take a breath of whatever length, pause for a bit, exhale, and pause for a bit. You can notice how you respond to just doing that. And then what I would do, like if I feel, and this is not true for everybody, but if I feel a little depressed, if I feel a little low energy, uh, like I need to just stand in the sun for a bit, but I don't have the sun available, what I can imagine as I inhale, and I don't have to imagine it because it's really happening, is that there's some energy coming into my body. You know, I'm taking in what I need. It's something nourishing about taking that breath. And then I can hold it for a bit. So that feeling of being nourished, of taking in, I can sustain it for a bit. And then when I'm exhaling, I'm letting go of what I don't need, right? So maybe I can imagine that this tiredness or depression or whatever it is that I feel is undesirable is leaving me, you know, as I exhale. And I pause in that emptiness for a moment, and then recognizing I've made some space for what's needed, for what's positive, right? And that's it. It's the simplest thing in the world. But I'm attaching to this rhythm of breath uh, imagery, ideas, feelings, sensations. Um, and all pranayama practice really just keys off of that. Like, what happens if you make the inhale and the pause of the after the inhale longer in relation to the exhale, or vice versa? How do I respond to that? Do I need to get rid of something extra? You know, maybe I make my exhale longer. Do I need more time to absorb and recognize that I've taken in something positive? Maybe I make that phase longer. This is all very personal though. And you know, rather than being prescriptive and saying, you know, universally holding after the inhale energizes you and holding after the exhale calms you or whatever, I just recommend that people try different things and see what they notice. And that can develop into a very powerful, accessible way of managing yourself.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
To that same vein, you know, right now, most people are taking classes online.
Well,
rather
at
than
least you
in a
can do,
studio,
yeah.
right?
I mean, they're not popping in the
Um,
VHS anymore for the classes. I bet some
so, you
people are
know,
digging out their old VHS tapes if they even have players for them now
oh
to
my
see if they can
gosh.
do that. Yeah.
Um, so my question is, and I've been hearing this from both students and teachers,
Hmm.
that as teachers, we generally can't see our students.
Hmm.
And as students, they're not really being seen by their teachers. So if you, and you know, you really helped me with this as a teacher,
Uh-huh.
how can someone at home who's doing practice without a teacher
Hmm.
adjusting them, or a teacher who's teaching at home without being able to adjust their students, how would you suggest we approach practice in this time of social distancing and video learning?
Sure. I think it's a very good question. And there's been some discussion of this online. I've been following a lot of what's been going on because, well, I have time. Um, um, it does point to good teaching practices. I often find myself saying when I'm teaching workshops that, you know, it's far more powerful to engage your students in an inquiry than to just simply issue corrections and cues and directions to them, including physical adjustments, which, don't get me wrong, are very, very useful and very powerful. And a lot of students really, really like the physical touch aspect of being adjusted, whereas some people don't respond very well to it at all. And of course, there's been discussion about that for a long, long time, about what kind of touch is appropriate and, you know, how to communicate between teacher and student, whether it's appropriate or not. But that aside now, you know, since the question is about online, turning the practice into an inquiry is all the more essential. And even if the teacher themselves are not in that mode so much, like I have taught online, I've taught through Zoom, and I actually enjoyed, first of all, seeing everyone's name in their little window, which, you know, I could address people by name, because in a live class, I don't register or remember people's names so well, right? So that was kind of fun. And depending on how they had their camera set up, I could actually see kind of what they were doing and make some suggestions or comments. But mostly it was to get the students to pay attention to what they're doing, you know. Um, and so if you're taking an online class, okay, and you're not necessarily being seen by the teacher or touched by the teacher or personally addressed by the teacher, that doesn't mean you can't take their cues, take their suggestions, take the movements and make them your own. Meaning every time you're given a cue, like put your knee here, turn your pelvis that way, reach your arm that way, whatever it is that you're being directed to do with your body, recognize that you have options. Recognize that if it doesn't feel right to you, you're allowed to make an adjustment. It's really the question of, are you trying to adapt to the practice, or are you permitting yourself to adapt the practice to you? Okay. And recognizing that's possible is really, really important, you know. And some people will say, well, but if you don't follow the cues, how do you know if you're doing it right or not? And it's like, well, you don't. That's what practice is for. You know, you try something else, and you see what you notice. So that's the formula that I use. Try this, now try that, now see what you notice. That turns the practice into an inquiry. And that can happen in any context. I mean, I could dig out an old VHS tape of anyone teaching yoga and put it in a VHS player and run it and use that instruction. And they're certainly not seeing me. It's not live. Maybe it's from the 80s. And I can say, oh, that's interesting. What if I try the way he's doing it? Now, what if I try it that way? And what can I notice? You know, that's always available.
Yeah, it seems that this whole time is a time of greater self-inquiry, right? We really get the time to check in with ourselves, and as you said, check in with our breathing. You know, am I reacting? Can I take a breath? Can I notice how I'm feeling? Can I respond? And such an opportunity. I took a class this morning on Zoom with a teacher, and you know, often when I'm in a class, I feel like I have to do what she says out of respect.
Right.
Because I could turn off my camera and just follow her instructions, I could really make it what I wanted it to be. So
Absolutely.
it's a real opportunity. And thank you for saying
Yeah, you
what
make
you
a good
said.
point. You know, in some ways, you're like, you're not under that pressure to keep up
Right.
appearances because, you know, you don't have to be seen. You know, you can just use it as a time to play and experiment and, you know, move your body and your breath in ways you wouldn't ordinarily do it, or you wouldn't think of doing it. And that's what, you know, being in a class is good for, you know. So yeah, I think it's you know, it's a great opportunity. I mean, I don't want to sugarcoat the situation and say, oh, this is a great yogic opportunity to go inside and develop our swadhyaya. I mean, yes, it is, but like, let's face it, things are pretty damn scary out there, and there's no way to sugarcoat the fact that, you know, this situation is really, it really sucks. People are dying. Um, you know, people are afraid. Uh, so many people in the world are one or two paychecks away from not being able to feed themselves, or having to choose between feeding themselves and paying rent.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of yoga teachers are in that category. I know that for a fact. So, you know, it's terribly scary. Um, and uh, and you know, if you can be with yourself and be with your breath on a moment-to-moment basis, you have the tools to help manage the anxiety, the fear, in some cases, depression that could set in this situation, and to just make that moment-to-moment choice to be present and choose to do something constructive as best you can, given the circumstances. But definitely, if you can, get outside, breathe the air, feel the sun, move, walk, you know, all of that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time with me today. Really helpful and great to connect
Yeah.
with you.
Yeah. I just want to add one thing. You know, I've been watching, like, there's been benefit concerts and stuff, and everyone's thanking the first responders and the nurses and the doctors, and absolutely, I mean, the degree of work and dedication that is going on in that community is extraordinary, and we rightly should be very, very thankful. But I just want to point something else out. There are people that are keeping server farms running and internet service providers functioning to allow this conversation to take place, who we don't think of as being heroes. Okay, there's human beings there making the internet run and keeping it running under enormous loads at the moment, I might add. And you know, that's a little more invisible, I think, to people. But I just want to point out how grateful I am that we have the connectivity to even have these conversations, and for people to take these online classes. You know, and there's a lot of people who are going to work and keeping that going. You can't do a lot of that from home. You have to actually be out there on site to maintain the systems and the hardware and everything that allows us to have a conversation like that. So I'm thankful for those people as well.
Absolutely. And speaking of online classes, if you want to learn a little more from Leslie right now, I mean, we've got some time. If
Yeah,
you do
we have
have,
some, we've opened up some of our programming for free to the public.
oh, great.
Yeah, there's some links that I'll provide to you that you can put along with the video. Yeah, we're definitely trying to make it as accessible to people as possible to be able to practice at home with as few barriers as we can manage. So yeah, there's
Absolutely.
yogaanatomy.net, there's my personal website, yogaanatomy.org, and there's a few other initiatives that we've linked to that we can share with folks. So absolutely.
yogaanatomy.net and yogaanatomy.org. Absolutely. And you can watch classes at soulofyoga.com /online as well. And, you know, hopefully come fall, we will be working with Leslie and a wonderfully skilled fascial expert, Lori Nemitz, to offer a in-person cadaver dissection in San Diego.
Definitely a bucket list item. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We are really looking forward to
End of
hopefully being
October
able
in
to
San
meet in
Diego.
person
Yeah.
and learn more about these incredible human suits that we all have, and breath, how breath is integral to our holistic health. And Leslie will
Yeah.
be leading
It'll
us
be an
in.
unusual focus for a cadaver dissection to have yoga people and body workers and other folks present who ordinarily wouldn't have access to a cadaver lab to bring that level of focus on the systems that we're interested in, especially the breathing and the spine and the myofascial systems that make everything work. So looking forward to seeing you and everyone else in that lab at the end of October.
All right, Leslie, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Appreciate it. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Hope so.
Okay. Be well.
Take care now.
Bye.
Okay.